Madison Harper never imagined that holding the trembling hand of an elderly gentleman during a painful procedure at Riverside General Hospital would completely change the course of her life. "My son should be here," the gentleman lamented, squeezing her hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Michael always manages to calm my heart when these tests frighten me." Madison smiled gently as the doctor finished drawing blood. She had no idea that this Michael, mentioned with such affection, was Michael Sterling, heir to the largest winery in Northern California, and that through an extraordinary twist of fate, he was about to cross her path in a way neither could predict. The day had begun like any other during Madison's internship. A dedicated pharmacy student, she split her time between evening classes at the university and her daytime internship at Riverside General. That morning, however, there was something different in the air. Perhaps it was the scent of fresh coffee, wafting through the corridors, or the golden light streaming through the windows, transforming the typically austere environment into something almost welcoming. "Miss Harper, could you help with the patient in bed 5? Asked the head nurse, handing her a clipboard with forms. "He's quite nervous about the blood draw, and his family hasn't arrived yet." That's how Madison met Anthony Sterling, patriarch of one of the most influential families in Sonoma County, California. What she didn't expect was that her simple presence and words of comfort would be noticed not only by the gentleman, but also by his son, who arrived at the hospital moments after the blood draw. "Dad, sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible and Michael Sterling interrupted his words upon seeing his father chatting animatedly with a young woman in a white coat, chestnut hair pulled back in an unpretentious ponytail, and a smile that lit up the entire room. Madison didn't immediately notice Michael's presence. She was busy explaining to Mr. Anthony the importance of correctly following his prescribed medication regimen. When she finally noticed the tall, athletic man standing at the door, she felt an inexplicable shiver run down her spine. "Miss, I don't know how to thank you for taking such good care of my father," said Michael, approaching with a smile that made Madison momentarily lose her train of thought. "Just doing my job," she replied, extending her hand to greet him. "Formally, Madison Harper, pharmacy intern." "Michael Sterling," he responded, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "It's truly a pleasure to meet someone who managed to calm my father. He usually hates hospitals." "Your father is a lovely gentleman. He just needed a little distraction." Madison smiled, feeling her cheeks flush slightly. What Madison didn't know was that Michael had just returned from an international trip where he'd perfected his sommelier techniques to expand the family business. She also did imagine that he, impressed by her kindness, would discreetly ask the head nurse about her before leaving the hospital. That night, returning to the small apartment where she lived with her parents and her sister with Down syndrome, Madison couldn't get the encounter with Michael Sterling out of her head. There was something about him that sparked her curiosity. Perhaps it was the way his eyes lit up when he spoke with his father, or how genuinely grateful he seemed for the help she'd offered. "How was your day, honey?" asked her mother, Mrs. Teresa, while preparing dinner. Owner of a small gift and convenience shop, Teresa always arrived home in time to prepare the family meal. "Or normal," Madison replied, bending down to pet Bella, the little dog she'd given her sister, but secretly adored. "Well, almost normal." "Does this almost normal have a name?" teased her sister Paige, carefully observing Madison's expressions. "Don't be silly," Madison laughed, but couldn't avoid the blush that colored her face. "I just met some interesting people at the hospital today." That same night, miles away at the Sterling family estate in Sonoma County, Michael shared dinner with his parents, his brother-in-law, and the housekeeper who had raised him since childhood. "That young intern was an angel," commented Anthony, serving himself one of the award-winning wines from the family winery. "You should have seen her, Michael, holding my hand as if we were old friends." "I saw her, Dad," Michael replied with a discreet smile. "And I agree. She seems special." Joan, the housekeeper who showed almost maternal care for Michael, raised an eyebrow, immediately catching the interest in his voice. "Careful with that tone, my boy. I've known that look since you were 5 years old and wanted to steal cookies from the kitchen." The family laughed and Michael tried to play it off, but the truth was that Madison Harper had awakened his curiosity. And he, the determined man he was, already planned a way to see her again. Fate, however, would work in his favor faster than expected. The next morning, while reviewing the list of enrollees for the exclusive sommelier course he would offer, the following week, one name jumped out at him: Madison Harper. What Michael didn't know was that Madison's enrollment in the course wasn't her idea, but rather an early birthday gift from her musician brother, recently arrived from the state capital. "To expand your horizons," he had said, handing her the enrollment certificate. Little did he know that gift would be the beginning of a story that would transform his sister's life forever. Chance had cast its dice. The hospital encounter had been just the first chapter of a story yet to be written, page by page, glass by glass, between fine wines and gazes full of unspoken promises. The Sterling Winery Hall was elegantly decorated for the beginning of the sommelier course. Soft lighting highlighted strategically placed bottles of award-winning wines, creating an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and welcoming. Michael meticulously adjusted the room temperature, checked the glasses, and reviewed materials one last time. This wasn't just another course. It was the first he would teach since returning from Europe, and he wanted to impress not only the students, but also his father, who was finally beginning to hand over the business reins to him. Madison parked her bicycle outside the imposing building and took a deep breath, trying to calm the nervousness growing in her chest. Dressed in a simple navy blue blouse and jeans, she immediately felt out of place seeing the luxury cars in the parking lot. For a moment she considered turning around and making up an excuse to her brother about not attending the course. You must be Miss Harper," said a female voice behind her. An elegant receptionist smiled, quickly consulting a list. "We've been expecting you. Please, follow me." "Actually, I think there's been a mistake," Madison began, nervously adjusting her purse strap. "I'm not sure this course is for me. I don't know anything about wines and—" "Nonsense," the woman replied with a warm smile. "The course is precisely for beginners. Our sommelier is excellent at making everyone feel comfortable, regardless of their knowledge level." Reluctantly, Madison followed the receptionist into the building, marveling at the architecture that blended modern and rustic elements. The walls displayed photographs of Sterling Winery's history, from its humble origins to becoming a national and international reference. Upon entering the hall where the course would take place, Madison almost let out an exclamation of surprise. There he was, Michael Sterling, adjusting some bottles on a solid wood table. Dressed in a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves that revealed strong forearms, he looked even more attractive than she remembered. "Welcome to the introductory sommelier course," Michael began once all students, about 10 people, were seated. His gaze swept the room, lingering a moment longer on Madison, who was trying to go unnoticed in the back. "My name is Michael Sterling, and I'll be your instructor for the next few weeks." During the first hour, Michael explained basic concepts about wine regions, grape varieties, and production methods. His passion for the subject was contagious, and even Madison, initially uninterested, found herself completely absorbed in the explanations. "Now, let's get to the fun part," announced Michael with a smile, revealing discreet dimples. "The tasting. But first, I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. Let's start with the person to my right, please." One by one, participants introduced themselves. There were business people, chefs, and wine enthusiasts. When it was Madison's turn, she felt all attention focused on her. My name is Madison Harper, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm a pharmacy student, and to be honest, I'm here because my brother gave me this course as a gift. I know absolutely nothing about wines. Welcome, Madison, Michael replied, with a gleam in his eyes that didn't go unnoticed by the other. Students. Sometimes, the best experiences begin when we allow ourselves to explore something completely new. During the tasting, Michael circulated among the students, offering guidance and answering questions. When he reached Madison's table, he leaned slightly. "We meet again," he said in a low voice. "I must say I was surprised to see your name on the participant list. Not as surprised as I was to discover who would be the instructor," she replied, trying to maintain composure while he was so close. "How is your father?" "Much better, thanks to the care he received." Michael smiled. "He doesn't stop talking about the kind intern who held his hand during the tests." Madison blushed slightly, looking away to the wine glass in front of her. "I was just doing my job." "And you did it exceptionally well," Michael observed her, lifting the glass hesitantly. "Allow me to demonstrate the correct technique." And naturally, he positioned himself beside her and gently adjusted the position of her fingers on the glass stem. "Hold it by the stem, like this. This prevents the heat from your hand from altering the wine's temperature." In the brief touch of his fingers on hers sent an electric current through Madison's body. For a moment their gazes met, and she saw something in those hazel eyes that made her heart race. "Now swirl gently," he continued, his voice slightly huskier. "Watch how the wine creates tears on the sides of the glass." Madison obeyed, aware that several other students were watching the interaction with curiosity. The proximity between them seemed to create an invisible bubble, as if the rest of the world had momentarily disappeared. The rest of the class passed quickly, with Michael demonstrating tasting techniques and explaining differences between wines from various regions. Despite her apparent lack of prior knowledge, Madison proved to be an attentive student, asking insightful questions that impressed not only Michael, but also the other participants. "You have a naturally refined palate," Michael commented at the end of class, while other students were saying goodbye. "You managed to identify notes that many beginners take weeks to perceive." "Maybe it's my pharmacy background," Madison replied with a shy smile. "We're always training to identify substances by their smells and tastes." "Interesting connection," he reflected, beginning to organize the used glasses. "I'd never thought of that." Madison looked at her watch and startled. "Oh my, it's late. I need to go. I have class at the university in an hour." "You came by bike, didn't you?" Michael asked, remembering seeing her arrive. "Yes, I live relatively close," she replied, picking up her bag. "Let me give you a ride," he offered. "It's getting dark and you won't make it in time pedaling." Madison hesitated. Accepting a ride from a man she barely knew wasn't something she would normally do. On the other hand, she had the strange feeling she could trust him. "What about my bike?" she asked, still undecided. "We can put it in my car's trunk. It's spacious enough," he replied, already getting his keys. "Or I promise it's just a ride, no ulterior motives." Something in his sincere tone convinced Madison. "Okay, I accept, but only because I'm really late." On the way to the university, conversation flowed naturally. Michael told about his trips to Europe to study winemaking techniques, while Madison spoke about her passion for pharmacology and her desire to develop more accessible medications in the future. "You're nothing like I imagined," Michael commented while driving through Sonoma's busy streets. "And how did you imagine me?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I'm not sure," he replied thoughtfully, "but I certainly didn't expect a pharmacy. Student who rides a bike, has an exceptional palate for wines, and asks questions that make me rethink knowledge I thought was consolidated." Madison laughed, feeling strangely comfortable. And you're not the arrogant businessman I expected. Touché, he smiled, parking in front of the university. So we both had our expectations pleasantly frustrated. Getting out of the car, Madison hesitated for a moment. Thank you for the ride and for the class. It was much more interesting than I expected. The pleasure was mine, Michael replied. See you next class, Thursday. He'll be there, she confirmed, taking her bike that Michael had already removed from the trunk. Good night, Professor Sterling. Michael, he corrected softly. Please, call me Michael. Good night, Michael, she repeated, with a smile that lit up her face. While watching her enter the university building, Michael realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was genuinely interested in getting to know someone beyond social appearances. There was something about Madison Harper, her simplicity, her sharp intelligence, her kindness, that intrigued him deeply. What he didn't know was that Joan, his overprotective housekeeper, was already discreetly investigating who this pharmacy intern was who had captured her dear boy's attention. And what she would discover in the coming days could significantly complicate the course of this story that was just beginning. Thursday arrived faster than Madison expected. In the 2 days that separated the course's first meeting from the second class, she found herself constantly thinking about Michael. There was something about him that challenged all her preconceptions about wealthy and powerful men, a genuine authenticity that showed through his gestures and words. And you're different, Paige commented during breakfast, watching her sister attentively while feeding Bella bits of bread. You're more, I don't know, radiant. Don't be silly, Madison replied, trying to hide the smile that insisted on appearing whenever she remembered the wine class. I'm just excited about the internship. We're starting a new project at the hospital. I see. Paige raised her eyebrows suggestively. And does this new project have a first and last name? Madison threw a napkin at her sister, laughing. I'll be late if I continue with this interrogation. See you tonight. Upon arriving at the hospital for her morning shift, Madison was surprised by a small arrangement of wildflowers at the reception addressed to her. It arrived early, the receptionist informed with a curious smile. The delivery person said it was for the kind pharmacy intern who saved Mr. Sterling's day. With trembling hands, Madison opened the small card that accompanied the flowers. My father insisted on thanking you properly. We hope to see you again tonight to continue your journey through the world of wines. MS. The bouquet was simple but elegant. Carefully arranged field flowers, nothing ostentatious or excessive. Exactly the type of gift that pleased her. How could Michael know this? The morning passed in a blur of activities, with Madison dividing her attention between patients and thoughts about the wine instructor who wouldn't leave her head. Around noon, while organizing medications in the hospital pharmacy, she was surprised by a familiar voice. Miss Harper, what a pleasant coincidence. Turning quickly, Madison saw Mr. Anthony Sterling, accompanied by an elegant lady she presumed to be his wife. Mr. Sterling, are you feeling better? She asked, genuinely happy to see him recovered. Much better, thank God, and the good care I received here, he replied, smiling. This is my wife, Claire. Dear, this is the young woman I told you about. The woman, who possessed the same warm expression as Michael in her eyes, extended her hand to Madison. My husband doesn't stop talking about you. He said you were an angel during the tests. I was just doing my job, ma'am, Madison replied, feeling her cheeks flush with the compliment. And we heard you're participating in our son's sommelier course, commented Mr. Sterling, with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. Michael seems quite impressed with your natural aptitude. Michael talked about me. The words escaped before Madison could contain them. and she immediately regretted it upon seeing the knowing smile the couple exchanged. "Oh, he just mentioned there was a very insightful pharmaceutical student," Mrs. Sterling replied diplomatically. "But to be honest, we know our son well. He doesn't usually comment on specific students during dinner." Madison didn't know how to respond to this revelation and was saved by an announcement on the hospital's sound system calling her to the pediatric wing. "Excuse me, I need to go," she said, genuinely sorry to interrupt the conversation. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Sterling, and I'm glad you're feeling better, sir." "The pleasure was ours, dear," Mrs. Sterling replied. "I hope we can talk more on another occasion." As she walked away, Madison couldn't help but notice the almost hopeful tone in the lady's voice. Was she imagining things, or did Michael's parents seem strangely interested in her? The rest of the day passed normally, although Madison couldn't stop thinking about the encounter with the Sterlings and what it meant that Michael had mentioned her name during a family dinner. At exactly 6 o'clock, Madison entered the Sterling Winery Hall for the second sommelier class. This time, she was slightly more confident, wearing a moss-green blouse that her mother had insisted complimented her eyes. "You came." Michael's voice surprised her as she signed the attendance list. He seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "Of course I came," she replied, smiling. "Thank you for the flowers, by the way. They were a very kind gesture." "My father insisted," Michael said, although something in his look suggested the idea hadn't been exclusively Anthony's. "He and my mother apparently met you at the hospital today." "Yes, it was a pleasant surprise," Madison confirmed. "Your mother is a charming lady." She said the same about you," Michael smiled, revealing those dimples that Madison was beginning to find irresistibly charming. Apparently, surrounded by people who were impressed with Madison Harper. Before she could respond, other students began arriving, and Michael needed to greet them. Madison noticed some elegantly dressed women casting curious glances in her direction, probably questioning the familiarity with which the instructor treated her. That night's class was about red wines, with special focus on varieties produced at Sterling Winery. Michael spoke with such enthusiasm and knowledge that it was impossible not to be infected by his passion. "The secret of a great wine isn't just in the grapes or climate," he explained, while serving small portions for students to taste. "It's in the story behind it, in the hands that cultivated the vines, in traditions passed from generation to generation." While Michael explained differences between vintages, Madison discreetly observed his hands, strong with long fingers and some calluses that revealed that, despite his privileged position, he wasn't afraid of physical work, hands that told a different story from what she expected of a successful businessman. "This particular vintage," Michael continued, approaching Madison's table with a special bottle, "is my personal pride. It was the first I produced completely alone, from harvest to bottling." As he served a small amount in Madison's glass, his fingers lightly brushed hers, and again that disturbing electricity ran through her body. Their gazes met for an instant that seemed to extend indefinitely. "Try it," he said, his voice slightly lower. "Tell me what you feel." Madison brought the glass to her nose, as she'd learned in the previous class, and closed her eyes to better concentrate on the aromas. Dark fruits, blackberry maybe, and something else, earthy. "Very good," Michael encouraged. "Now taste." She took a small sip, letting the liquid rest on her tongue before swallowing. "It's complex. It has a smooth beginning, but then an intensity emerges that lingers. It reminds me of something familiar, but I can't identify exactly what." Michael smiled, genuinely impressed. "You perfectly described what I tried to achieve with this wine. Most people don't perceive the nuances on the first tasting." Maybe I have a good teacher, Madison replied, returning the smile. The rest of the class continued with more tastings and explanations about the peculiarities of Sonoma County wines. Madison noticed that, although Michael circulated among all students, he always returned to her table, offering additional explanations, or simply exchanging observations. At the end of class, while other students were saying goodbye, Michael approached Madison again. "I have a proposal for you," he said, with a mixture of confidence and hesitation in his voice. "Tomorrow I am visiting the vineyards to check how this year's harvest process is going. Would you like to accompany me? It would be an opportunity to see in practice everything we're discussing in the course." Madison bit her lower lip, undecided. The invitation was tempting, but it also represented a step beyond the teacher-student relationship they maintained until then. "I don't know if it would be appropriate," she replied finally. "I don't want to receive special treatment compared to other students." "I understand your concern," Michael nodded, respecting her hesitation. "But I must confess that my interest in inviting you goes beyond the course. I'd like to get to know you better, Madison, without the formal context of classes." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. There were no games or artifices, just a man showing genuine interest. Besides," he continued with a mischievous smile, "my parents insisted very much that I invite you. Apparently, they also want to get to know you better." Madison couldn't help but laugh. "Your parents are quite persuasive." "You have no idea," Michael agreed, rolling his eyes dramatically. "So what do you say? It's just a walk through the vineyards, followed by an informal lunch at the family estate. I promise to bring you back in time for your hospital shift or classes, whichever comes first." Something inside Madison, perhaps that part that had always dreamed of adventures outside her structured routine, made her accept. "All right, I accept the invitation, but I need to be back by 4 in the afternoon for my class at the university." "Deal." Michael smiled, clearly satisfied. "I'll pick you up at 9 in the morning. Where should I meet you?" Madison gave him her address, still not completely convinced she was doing the right thing. She had known this man for less than a week and had already accepted an invitation to meet his family and property. What would her mother say? As if reading her thoughts, Michael added, "If you prefer, I can call your parents and introduce myself, formally. I know it might seem hasty, and I understand if you want to preserve your privacy." The genuine concern in his tone reassured Madison. "No, it's okay. I'm an adult and can make my own decisions. I'm just not used to this." "This?" Michael asked, raising an eyebrow. "Receiving invitations from successful businessmen to visit vineyards," she replied with a shy smile. Michael laughed, a rich and genuine sound that made something warm expand in Madison's chest. "And am not used to inviting pharmacy interns to meet my family after only 2 encounters. It seems we're both in unknown territory." They said goodbye with the promise of the next day's meeting. While pedaling back home, Madison tried to understand the whirlwind of emotions that dominated her. She was anxious, scared, and inexplicably happy at the same time. The Sonoma sun was already shining intensely when Michael parked his car in front of the building where Madison lived. Punctually, at 9 o'clock, as agreed, he wore a light blue shirt with rolled sleeves and khaki pants that gave him a casual but elegant air. Nervous as a teenager on his first date, he checked the rearview mirror one last time before getting out of the car. In the apartment, Madison was finishing getting ready while her mother watched her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "Are you sure you know this young man well enough to accept such an invitation?" asked Mrs. Teresa, helping her daughter choose between 2 pairs of simple earrings. "Mom, it's just an educational tour," Madison replied, trying to sound more confident than she really was. "He's my teacher in the wine course, remember? and I've already met his parents at the hospital." Murmured Mrs. Teresa, not entirely convinced. "And why is this teacher so interested in showing vineyards specifically to you? Wouldn't this be something all students should see?" Paige, who was watching the scene from the bedroom door with Bella in her arms, let out a giggle. "Because he's interested in Madison, obviously. Even I, with all my syndrome, can see that." "Paige," Madison scolded, but couldn't avoid the smile. Her sister always had a direct way of putting things. The doorbell rang, interrupting the conversation. Mr. Harper, who was reading the newspaper in the living room, got up to answer. "Good morning." Madison heard Michael's voice from the living room. "But I'm Michael Sterling. I came to pick up Madison for a tour of my family vineyards." There was a moment of silence that seemed to last an eternity. Madison imagined her father, a man of few words but evaluating gaze, meticulously analyzing. The visitor. "Pleasure," Mr. Harper finally replied. "I'm Charles Harper, Madison's father. Please come in." Madison took a deep breath, checked her appearance one last time in the mirror. She had opted for a simple dress with small flowers, comfortable for walking among vineyards, and left the room accompanied by her mother and sister, who was practically bouncing with curiosity. Michael was in the living room, politely conversing with her father about the challenges of driving a taxi in Sonoma County. Upon seeing her, his face lit up with a smile that made Madison's heart skip. "Good morning," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good morning," Michael replied, standing up. "You look beautiful." The compliment, said with such simplicity and sincerity, made Madison blush. Mrs. Teresa and Paige exchanged meaningful looks. "This is my mother, Teresa, and my sister, Paige," Madison introduced. Michael greeted both with genuine cordiality, but it was his interaction with Paige that captured everyone's attention. Instead of treating her with the condescension many people showed when meeting a young woman with Down syndrome, he addressed her directly, with respect and sincere interest. "Paige, your sister told me you're part of a dance group. What style?" "Oh, do you practice?" he asked. Paige's eyes sparkled with genuine interest. "We dance everything, but my favorite is country line dancing. Do you dance, Michael?" "I confess I'm terrible at it," he laughed. "Maybe someday you could teach me some steps." "Deal!" exclaimed Paige, already completely won over. After introductions and a brief conversation, during which Michael skillfully answered all of Mr. Harper's veiled questions about his intentions. "It's really an educational tour, sir, although I won't deny that your daughter's company makes everything more pleasant." They finally said goodbye. "I'll bring her back by 4, as we agreed," Michael assured Mr. Harper, who nodded, slightly more relaxed after the conversation. In the elevator, Madison couldn't contain a sigh of relief. "Sorry about the family interrogation. They're a bit overprotective." "No need to apologize," Michael replied with a calm smile. "It's comforting to see how much they care about you. Besides, your father asked much easier questions than Joan, my housekeeper, would if she were in his place." "Is she that intimidating?" Madison asked, curious. "Let's say she raised 2 ponies specifically to chase away unwanted suitors," Michael joked, opening the car door for her. During the drive to the Sterling family estate, conversation flowed naturally. Michael told stories about his childhood on the rural property, about how his father had transformed a small family vineyard into an internationally renowned company, and how his mother, despite financial success, had never abandoned her roots as an artisan and guardian of local traditions. "My mother will love talking to you about regional festivals," he commented. "I heard you participate in the university's folk group." "How do you know that?" Madison asked, surprised. Michael seemed slightly embarrassed. "I might have asked about you to some people. I hope you don't mind." "It depends on who you asked and what you discovered," she replied, between amused and intrigued. Just the basics. He smiled enigmatically. That you're an excellent student, beloved by professors and colleagues, that you participate in the folk group, and that you have a secret passion for cooking, although you only do it as a hobby. Impressive, Madison murmured. Seems I was completely investigated. Don't be mad, Michael pleaded, glancing at her sideways while driving. I was genuinely curious about you. There's something about Madison Harper that has intrigued me since the first moment I saw you at the hospital. The sincerity in his voice disarmed any pretense of irritation Madison might feel. In fact, part of her was secretly flattered by his interest. As they moved away from Sonoma's center, the landscape gradually became greener and more lush. Finally, Michael turned onto a private road leading to the Sterling family property. Madison couldn't contain an exclamation of surprise upon seeing the extensive vineyards stretching across gentle hills, with row upon row of carefully cultivated vines. It's beautiful," she murmured, admiring the landscape. "Wait until you see it from the top of the main hill," Michael replied, visibly proud. "On clear days, the view is breathtaking." The main estate was an elegant construction combining colonial elements with modern touches. Around it, several sheds and simpler installations served different purposes for the winery. In the entrance courtyard, 2 ponies grazed peacefully. "Chip and Dale?" Madison asked, laughing and pointing to the animals. "The very ones," Michael confirmed. "Don't be fooled by their size and docile appearance. They're true guardians when they want to be." As they got out of the car, they were greeted by a middle-aged woman with upright posture and attentive gaze. Madison immediately knew she was facing the famous Joan. "Miss Harper, I presume," said the housekeeper, analyzing her from head to toe with a penetrating look. "Michael has spoken quite a bit about you. Welcome to Sterling Estate." "Thank you," Madison replied, extending her hand, which Joan shook firmly. "Michael also spoke about you. Though I hope only good things," Joan replied with a slight smile that softened her expression. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling are waiting for you on the terrace for coffee before the vineyard tour." While following Joan to the terrace, Michael whispered, "To Madison, you passed the first test." She smiled at you. That rarely happens on the first meeting. The terrace was a spacious and welcoming area overlooking the vineyards. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling were seated in comfortable wicker chairs, enjoying the sunny morning. "Madison, dear," exclaimed Mrs. Sterling, getting up to greet her with a warm hug that caught Madison by surprise. "What a joy to receive you in our home." "The pleasure is all mine, ma'am," Madison replied, genuinely touched by the warm reception. "Your property is magnificent." "Years of hard work and love," commented Mr. Sterling, shaking her hand firmly. "Michael told us you showed genuine interest in the wine production process. It's rare to find young people willing to learn about ancestral traditions." "Actually, I'm just beginning to learn," Madison admitted honestly. "But your son is an excellent teacher." He certainly seems inspired to teach lately," observed Mrs. Sterling with a meaningful smile, making Michael clear his throat embarrassedly. After a breakfast full of pleasant conversations, Michael invited Madison for the promised vineyard tour. He gave her a straw hat to protect her from the sun and offered his arm for support as they descended the paths between the vines. "Each section of the vineyard has its own characteristics," he explained, clearly in his element. "The soil, sun exposure, even the predominant wind direction, everything influences the final character of the grape and consequently the wine." Madison listened fascinated as Michael explained the different stages of grape growth, the necessary care at each phase, and how small decisions during cultivation could have major impacts on the final product. "It's like a living laboratory," she commented, gently holding a cluster of still green grapes. Each variable needs to be controlled and continuously adjusted. Exactly! Michael exclaimed, clearly satisfied with the observation. That's why I say we do science as much as art. Can you see the connections with your field of study? Surprisingly, yes, Madison replied thoughtfully. In pharmacology, we also seek to understand how small changes in compounds can completely alter their effects on the organism. It's all a matter of balance and precision. As they walked to the top of the hill Michael had mentioned, conversation flowed naturally from one topic to another, from viticulture and pharmacology to childhood memories and future aspirations. And so you really want to develop more accessible medications? Michael asked, when they reached the natural viewpoint offering a panoramic view of the entire property. It's my dream, Madison confirmed, admiring the stunning landscape. I grew up seeing people in my community choosing between buying medicine or food. No one should face that kind of dilemma. Michael watched her with an expression that mixed admiration and something deeper, indefinable. You're extraordinary, you know. Most people just complain about problems. You really want to do something about it. It's not extraordinary to want to make a difference, Madison replied, slightly embarrassed by the compliment. Medicine should be a right, not a privilege. It's precisely that conviction that makes you special, Michael insisted, subtly approaching. You see the world not just as it is, but as it could be. They were so close now that Madison could feel the warmth emanating from his body, could perceive the subtle scent of his cologne mixed with the characteristic smell of the vineyards. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her, and surprised herself by realizing how much she wanted that. But Michael just smiled, lightly touching her face with his fingertips. I think lunch should be almost ready. Should we go back? Oh, the moment had passed, but the electricity between them remained, almost palpable. Madison nodded, not trusting her voice to respond. Back at the estate, they found the table set on another terrace, this one more intimate and facing a small garden where wildflowers grew in apparent disorder, but with an enchanting natural harmony. And everything served today was produced here on the estate or by local producers, explained Mrs. Sterling, while Joan and another employee brought the dishes. We believe in the importance of valuing what our land offers us. Lunch was a true celebration of regional gastronomy, with traditional California dishes prepared with the highest quality ingredients. Michael sat beside Madison, occasionally leaning to explain the origin of some dish or its connection to local history. During the meal, Michael's brother, David Sterling, who Madison discovered was an important political figure in the region, joined them, bringing vibrant energy and sharp humor that perfectly complemented Michael's more moderate temperament. "So you're the famous Madison," David commented after being introduced. "My brother turned our family dinner last night into a monologue about your exceptional tasting abilities." "David," Michael warned, shooting a reproachful look at his brother. "What?" "I'm just being honest," David retorted with a mischievous smile. "You have to admit it's the first time in years we've seen you so excited about something besides harvests and exports." Madison couldn't help but laugh at the interaction between the brothers. It was refreshing to see this more relaxed side of Michael, away from the businessman's composure or the wine instructor's seriousness. After lunch, while the others retired for a brief rest, Michael invited Madison to see another special place. On the property, the bird sanctuary. "It's my personal refuge," he explained as they walked along a shaded trail. "I started collecting native species when I was a teenager. Today, the sanctuary serves as a small haven for rescued birds and as research space for university students." The sanctuary was an impressive structure, spacious, covered by almost invisible nets, replicating various natural microenvironments with native vegetation. Dozens of colorful birds flew freely among the trees and bushes. "It's wonderful." "Indeed," Madison whispered, enchanted by the beauty and tranquility of the place. "I never imagined you'd have an interest like this." "Why not?" Michael asked, genuinely curious. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because it's not what you'd expect. From the air to a wine empire." "And what would you expect? Someone more calculating, perhaps? Less concerned with environmental preservation and more with the bottom line?" Michael laughed, but there was a touch of melancholy in his eyes. "Most people have that impression. That's why I keep certain aspects of my life private. Few understand that it's possible to reconcile successful business with social and environmental responsibility." While they watched the birds, a small western bluebird confidently perched on Michael's shoulder, surprising Madison. "This is Maestro," Michael introduced with affection in his voice. "He was the first bird I rescued almost 10 years ago. He had a broken wing and everyone thought he wouldn't survive, but he's a fighter." The way Michael spoke about the bird, with such affection and respect, touched Madison deeply. There was genuine goodness in this man that contrasted with everything she had previously assumed about people of his social position. "You're full of surprises, Michael Sterling," she said, smiling. "I hope they're pleasant surprises," he replied, returning the smile. "So far, yes," Madison admitted. "Very pleasant." Time seemed to fly, and soon they realized it was almost time for Madison to return for her university class. During the drive back, they talked about the next sommelier course meeting and the possibility of Madison returning to the estate on another occasion. "My mother is already planning to invite you to participate in one of the traditional festivals she organizes," Michael commented. "She was impressed to learn that you participate in the university's folk group." "I'd love to participate," Madison replied sincerely. "Your family is wonderful, Michael. Thank you for welcoming me so well." Upon arriving at the university, Michael parked the car and turned to her. "I should thank you for accepting my invitation. It was one of the most pleasant days I've had in a long time." There was so much Madison wanted to say, about how he had challenged all her expectations, about how she felt inexplicably connected to him, about how she wished the day wouldn't end. But all she managed was a simple, "For me too." Michael hesitated for a moment, as if fighting an internal battle, then slowly leaned toward her. This time there were no doubts about his intentions. "May I?" he murmured, his lips centimeters from hers. In response, Madison closed the distance between them. The kiss was gentle initially, almost hesitant, as if both feared breaking something fragile and precious. But soon it deepened, revealing all the tension and desire that had grown between them in recent days. When they finally separated, both were breathless, looking at each other with a mixture of surprise and enchantment. "See you Thursday, Michael said finally, his voice slightly hoarse. "At the course." "Thursday," Madison confirmed, an involuntary smile lighting up her face as she opened the car door. As she walked to her classroom, Madison was fully aware that something had irreversibly changed in her life. That day in the vineyards had planted a seed that was now beginning to sprout. A possibility she had never considered before, a feeling she didn't yet dare to completely name. What she didn't know was that on the way back to the estate, Michael would receive a call that would put that possibility at risk. A call that would remind him of obligations and expectations his family had for him, expectations that a simple pharmacy student didn't fit into. The days following the vineyard tour seemed to flow in an alternate reality for Madison. Her routine tasks at the hospital and university remained the same, but there was a new light in everything, as if the world had gained more vibrant, more defined colors. Even Paige had noticed the change. "You're humming," her sister observed, "during Wednesday morning's breakfast, and you don't even realize you're doing it." Madison smiled, not denying the observation. She had spent the previous night exchanging messages with Michael, conversations that began about wines and ended in reflections on life, dreams, and fears. It was surprising how, in such a short time, she felt like she had known him for years. At the hospital during her internship, Madison again encountered Mr. Anthony Sterling, who came for a routine checkup. The family patriarch smiled upon seeing her, as if they shared a secret. "My son doesn't stop talking about you," he commented while she checked his blood pressure. "Claire and I haven't seen him so animated in a long time." "Your son is an incredible man, Mr. Sterling," Madison replied, feeling her cheeks flush. "And you welcomed me so well to the estate. That's your home whenever you want to visit," the gentleman assured with a gleam in his eyes. "Especially now that Joan has finally approved someone. That hasn't happened since, well, it's never happened before." Madison laughed, genuinely flattered by the information. Joan's approval seemed to be a more rigorous test than any university exam. Wednesday passed quickly, and Madison could barely wait for Thursday night. For the sommelier course, yes, but mainly to see Michael again. They had agreed to have coffee after class to talk about Madison's next visit to the estate, this time for one of the traditional festivals organized by Mrs. Sterling. However, when Madison arrived at the Sterling Winery Hall that Thursday, she immediately perceived that something was different. Michael was there, impeccably dressed as always, but there was a formality in his posture, a distance in his gaze that hadn't existed before. "Oh, good evening," he greeted collectively when all students were present. "Tonight, we'll talk about sparkling wines, production methods, main producing regions, and characteristics that distinguish them." His voice was professional, almost methodical, far from the contagious enthusiasm of previous classes, and most disturbing to Madison, he barely looked in her direction. Throughout the entire class, Michael remained strictly professional. He circulated among the tables, offered explanations, conducted tastings, but always avoiding Madison's table or addressing her with the same formal courtesy he showed other students. The change was so drastic that even other participants noticed. One of the students, a chef who always sat near Madison, leaned over and whispered, "Did you two fight or something? The professor seems to be deliberately avoiding you." Madison just shook her head, confused and hurt too much to formulate a coherent response. What had happened? The messages exchanged the previous night had been warm and affectionate. The kiss in the car was still vivid in her memory. Why this sudden change? At the end of class, while other students were saying goodbye, Madison gathered courage to approach Michael directly. "Did something happen?" she asked, keeping her voice low so the few remaining students wouldn't hear. "You're different today." Michael hesitated, his eyes finally meeting hers, and what Madison saw in them frightened her. There was sadness, conflict, and something that looked very much like guilt. "Can we talk outside?" he suggested, with a formality that made her heart tighten. Outside the building, on the sidewalk illuminated by old-style lampposts that gave a nostalgic air to the night, Michael finally spoke. "Madison, about our involvement," he began, carefully choosing his words. "I think I was hasty. I let myself be carried away by the moment, by the attraction I feel for you, without considering the broader circumstances." What circumstances?" she asked, feeling an unpleasant cold spread through her body. Michael ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she had already identified as a sign of his nervousness. "I'm the heir to Sterling Winery. I'm about to assume the company's presidency when my father retires. I have responsibilities, expectations to fulfill. And I don't fit into those expectations," Madison completed, painful understanding finally hitting her. "Is that it?" "It's not that simple," Michael protested, seeming genuinely distressed. You're incredible, Madison. Intelligent, compassionate, authentic. Everything I've always admired in a person, but our worlds are very different. That didn't seem to matter when you invited me to meet your family, she retorted, fighting to maintain composure. Or when you kissed me. I know, he admitted, guilt evident in his voice. And I apologize for being impulsive. It wasn't my intention to hurt you. What changed, Michael? Madison asked directly. From one night to the next, you went from interested to distant. Something must have happened. Michael hesitated, clearly debating internally how much he should reveal. I received a call after dropping you off at the university. It was Isabella Montgomery, daughter of the country's largest wine distributor. Our parents have plans for us for years. An alliance between the families would significantly strengthen our business. An alliance? Madison repeated, the word bitter in her mouth. You mean an arranged marriage? It's not as medieval as that, Michael protested, though his tone wasn't very convincing. We grew up together, always knew that eventually. So you're engaged? Madison interrupted, needing the raw truth, however painful. Not officially, he replied, but there are expectations. Isabella is returning from Europe next week, specifically to discuss the future. It would be unfair to her, to you, to myself, to start something I can't follow through. Madison felt as if the air had been sucked from her lungs. Part of her wanted to scream at him, accuse him of deceiving her, of playing with her feelings. Another part, the part that had begun to really know him, could see the genuine conflict in his eyes. I understand, she said finally, her voice surprisingly calm, despite the emotional storm in her interior. Thank you for the honesty. Madison. Michael took a step toward her, but she stepped back. It's okay, she assured, though both knew it wasn't. You have your responsibilities, I have mine. We're adults. We can maintain a strictly professional relationship during the rest of the course. I'm truly sorry, Michael insisted, anguish evident in his voice. The moments we spent together were genuine. You need to know that. Good night, Mr. Sterling, Madison replied formally, turning to leave. She didn't want him to see the tears that threatened to fall. See you next class. The bicycle ride home had never seemed so long. The cold night wind dried the tears Madison could no longer contain. How could she have been so naive? Of course, a man like Michael Sterling would have commitments to people in his social circle. Of course, interest in a simple pharmacy student would only be a momentary distraction. Upon arriving home, she went directly to her room, ignoring her mother's worried questions. Only Paige, with her heightened sensitivity, perceived that something serious had happened and, silently, sat beside her sister on the bed, offering comfort without words. In the following weeks, Madison forced herself to maintain her normal routine. She continued attending the sommelier course, maintaining professional distance from Michael. He, in turn, seemed equally determined to maintain appearances, treating her with the same polite courtesy he dispensed to other students. But both knew that something had been broken, a lost possibility, a path not taken. At the hospital, Madison actively avoided the wing where Mr. Sterling usually had his checkups, fearing meeting him and having to explain why she hadn't visited the estate again, why she hadn't participated in the festival Mrs. Sterling had mentioned with such enthusiasm. You're not well, her mother observed one night, while Madison played with her food without really eating. It's because of that young man from the winery, isn't it? It's nothing, Mom, Madison replied automatically. Just tiredness. And daughter, Mrs. Teresa sat beside her, taking her hands in hers. I know that look. It's the same one I had when your father and I temporarily separated before marriage. Heartache has a very specific expression. Madison finally allowed herself to break down in her mother's arms, telling everything about the vineyard tour, about how Michael had made her feel special, about Isabella Montgomery and the family, expectations he couldn't ignore. "Oh, my dear," sighed Mrs. Teresa, stroking her daughter's hair. Sometimes love is too complicated, especially when it involves different worlds." "It's not love, Mom," Madison protested, though she didn't entirely believe it herself. "Just an attraction, a possibility that didn't materialize. But..." At night, alone in her room, it was hard to deny the depth of what she felt. It wasn't just disappointment or wounded pride. It was a deeper, more complex pain that suggested her feelings for Michael Sterling had quickly become more significant than she'd like to admit. In the second-to-last class of the course, Madison noticed an elegant woman watching from afar, perfectly styled hair, discreet but obviously expensive jewelry, an air of natural sophistication that only came with generations of privilege. Something in her heart immediately knew. That was Isabella Montgomery. Her suspicion was confirmed when, at the end of class, the woman approached Michael, greeting him with kisses on both cheeks and a familiar touch on his arm. Madison quickly gathered her things, determined to leave before Michael introduced her. She didn't trust her ability to maintain composure in such a situation, but she wasn't fast enough. Michael, always polite, gestured for her to approach. "Madison, I'd like to introduce you to a longtime friend," he said, his voice betraying only slight discomfort. "This is Isabella Montgomery. Isabella, this is Madison Harper, one of my most promising students." "Student," Isabella repeated, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Michael spoke a lot about your course. It sounds fascinating." "It's quite educational," Madison replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Mr. Sterling is an excellent instructor." The use of the formal title didn't go unnoticed by Michael, who seemed momentarily hurt. Isabella, in turn, observed the interaction with shrewd eyes. "Well, I need to go," Madison said quickly. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Miss Montgomery." "Good night, Mr. Sterling." Before either could respond, she left, feeling the cool night air as a welcome relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the encounter. She was almost reaching her bicycle when she heard quick footsteps behind her. "Madison, wait!" Surprisingly, it wasn't Michael following her, but Isabella Montgomery. The elegant woman walked with determination, although her high heels seemed inadequate for the irregular pavement. "May I have a word with you?" Isabella asked, her tone polite but firm. "Of course," Madison replied, intrigued and apprehensive. "I won't pretend I didn't notice the tension between you and Michael," Isabella began directly. "I've known him since childhood. I know when something is bothering him." Madison remained silent, uncertain how to respond. "You two had some kind of involvement, didn't you?" Isabella continued, her tone surprisingly devoid of accusation. It seemed more like an objective observation. "It was just a brief misunderstanding," Madison replied finally. "It's already been clarified." Isabella studied her for a moment, as if evaluating the truthfulness of her words. "You know, I grew up knowing that someday I'd marry Michael. Our families, our businesses, everything seemed perfectly aligned. It seemed like destiny." "You'll make a perfect couple," Madison said, proud of how her voice remained steady despite the pain she felt. "The problem is..." Isabella paused, looking around as if checking that no one else was listening. "I don't love Michael. Not that way. And he certainly doesn't love me." The confession caught Madison completely off guard. "But family expectations are important in our world," Isabella agreed. "But you know what I discovered during my years in Europe? Life is too short to live it just to please others." "Why are you telling me this?" Madison asked, confused. "Because I saw how Michael looked at you when he thought no one was watching," Isabella replied simply. "And I've never seen him look at me that way, or anyone else. It would be selfish of me to proceed with plans that would make 3 people unhappy: me, Michael, and you. What are you suggesting? Nothing. For now, Isabella replied with a small smile. But I just wanted you to know that if Michael Sterling is the man you want, maybe you shouldn't give up on him so easily. With those enigmatic words, Isabella turned and walked back to the building, leaving Madison completely stunned. On the night of the last class of the course, the atmosphere was festive. A small graduation ceremony had been organized with certificates for all participants and a special tasting to celebrate. Madison had seriously considered not attending. The conversation with Isabella had left her even more confused, and part of her feared that the other woman's presence would only increase her discomfort. But something compelled her to finish what she had started, both the course and her story. With Michael, even if the ending wasn't what she secretly desired. Upon arriving at the hall, she noticed the table arrangement had been changed. Instead of the usual setup, facing the instructor's table, there was a large, circular table, creating a more intimate and egalitarian atmosphere. Michael was already there, talking with some students, but his eyes met Madison's as soon as she entered. To her surprise, he immediately excused himself from the group and walked toward her. "Can we talk privately before the ceremony?" he asked, his tone urgent. Almost pleading, Madison hesitated, but the sincerity in his eyes convinced her. All right. Michael led her to a small office adjacent to the main hall. He seemed nervous, running his hands through his hair repeatedly, that gesture she already knew so well. "First, I want to apologize," he began, words coming out rushed as if he feared losing courage, "for how I acted, for what I said. It was cowardly of me to hide behind family expectations instead of facing my own feelings." "Michael, oh, please let me finish," he pleaded. "And I spent the last few weeks trying to convince myself that the sensible thing would be to follow the path laid out for me. Marry Isabella, take over the company, fulfill my role as Sterling heir. But then Isabella came to me yesterday and said something that changed everything," Michael continued, a smile beginning to form on his lips. "She said, 'Michael, I think we both deserve the chance to discover what we really want, not what others want for us.' And then she officially broke our informal agreement." Madison felt her heart accelerate, but tried to contain premature optimism. "And what do you really want, Michael?" "You," he replied without hesitation. "From the moment I saw you holding my father's hand in that hospital room, something in me knew you were special. The days we spent together, the conversations we had, everything confirmed what my heart already knew. You're who I want by my side, Madison." "But what about expectations? Your family, the business?" "I talked to my parents," Michael said, surprising her. "Frankly, they were relieved. Apparently, my mother had already perceived during your visit to the estate that there was something special between us. And my father, well, he said he prefers a happy son to a business merger." "And Joan?" Madison asked, unable to avoid a small smile. "Joan said she knew from the beginning," Michael laughed. "Apparently Chip and Dale didn't try to bite you when you approached them, which she considers an undeniable sign that you belong to the Sterling family." The mention of the ponies made Madison laugh, relieving part of the tension, but there were still doubts, fears. "Michael, our worlds are really very different," she said, expressing her genuine concern. "I'm a middle-class pharmacy student. You're heir to a wine empire. How would this work in practice?" Our worlds are different, yes," he agreed, approaching and taking her hands in his. "But we're not so different, Madison. We both value family, tradition, honest work. We both want to make a difference in the world, you through accessible medicine, me through sustainable business practices. The circumstances of our birth are different, but our hearts speak the same language." His words touched Madison deeply. There was truth in them, a truth she herself had perceived during the moments they spent together. "I'm asking for a chance," Michael continued, his intense gaze fixed on hers. "A chance to discover together how to make this work. Because I believe with all my heart that it's worth trying." Madison felt the last resistances in her heart dissolve before his sincerity. There were risks, of course. There always would be. But there was also the possibility of something extraordinary, something that would be worth every obstacle overcome. "Yes," she replied finally, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "It's worth trying." The relief and joy on Michael's face were palpable. Without more words, he pulled her into an embrace, sealing the promise with a kiss that contained both regret for lost time and hope for the future that now opened before them. When they returned to the main hall, hand in hand, the other students exchanged knowing looks. The sommelier course graduation transformed into a double celebration of acquired knowledge and of a love story that, against all expectations, had found its way. And it all began with a simple act of kindness at Riverside General Hospital. Epilogue. 2 years later, the late afternoon sun bathed the Sterling Estate vineyards with golden light, creating an almost magical setting for the event unfolding on the main terrace. Tables elegantly decorated with local wildflowers spread across the space, where guests chatted animatedly, fine wine glasses in their hands. In a quieter corner, momentarily away from the party's bustle, Madison observed the scene with a serene smile. She wore a simple but elegant dress, and her hair, normally pulled back in a practical ponytail, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. "And a moment of introspection?" asked Claire Sterling, approaching with 2 wine glasses. She handed one to Madison and sat beside her. "Just admiring how everything worked out," Madison replied, gratefully accepting the glass. "Sometimes it still seems like a dream." "The best kind of reality," Claire corrected with a warm smile. "The kind that surpasses our most daring dreams." Madison nodded, her gaze sweeping over the guests. Her entire family was there. Her parents, Paige dancing animatedly with other young women, her musician brother and his band providing live entertainment. Mixed with them, as if they had always belonged to the same circle, were the Sterlings and their friends, a harmonious integration of worlds that had once seemed incompatible. "The laboratory is finally ready," Claire commented following. Madison's gaze. "Anthony couldn't be prouder of the project. He tells everyone that our daughter-in-law will revolutionize access to medications in California." De Madison smiled, still moved when thinking about the pharmaceutical research laboratory that now occupied part of the Sterling property. It had been a surprising wedding gift, not just the physical space, but also funding to develop accessible medications for underserved communities. "Graduation is coming up, isn't it?" Claire asked. "Michael talks about nothing else." 2 weeks, Madison confirmed. After years of study, she would finally receive her pharmacy degree. "He's more nervous than I am." "He's always been like that," Claire laughed. "Remember our wedding? I thought he'd faint before saying his vows." The wedding, held the previous year, had been a memorable celebration that blended Sterling family traditions with the warm simplicity that characterized the Harpers. Joan, the housekeeper, cried more than all the guests combined, while Chip and Dale, the ponies, were unlikely but adorable ring-bearers. "There he is," Claire observed, pointing to where Michael was chatting animatedly with Mr. Harper, talking about the next taxi expansion, I bet. Indeed, one of Michael's first initiatives after officially assuming Sterling Winery's presidency was creating a fund to support local small entrepreneurs. Mr. Harper, who had always dreamed of expanding his taxi service to a small fleet, was one of the first beneficiaries. As if feeling the two women's gaze, Michael turned and smiled upon seeing Madison. He excused himself from his father-in-law and walked toward them. "The two most important women in my life conspiring in a corner," he joked, leaning to kiss his mother on the cheek and then deposit a gentle kiss on Madison's lips. "Should I be worried?" "Always," Claire replied with a mischievous smile, getting up. "He'll check if your father isn't overdoing it with the wine." The doctor was quite clear about the limits. When Claire left, Michael took her place beside Madison, intertwining his fingers with hers. "Happy?" "Very," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "Who would have thought that holding the hand of a frightened gentleman during a blood test would bring me here?" "Fate works in mysterious ways," Michael philosophized. "Or maybe we create our destiny through small acts of kindness and courage." Madison smiled, thinking about how her life had transformed in the last 2 years. She continued working at the hospital a few hours a week, maintaining contact with the reality of people her laboratory sought to help. Michael, in turn, was gradually implementing more sustainable and socially responsible practices in the family company, proving that successful business and positive social impact could, and should, walk together. "Isabella called today," Michael commented casually. "The cultural center she opened in Paris is very successful. She said we should visit her when we go to Europe next month." Madison nodded, genuinely happy for the woman who, ironically, had been fundamental to her happy ending with Michael. After breaking the informal marriage agreement, Isabella had followed her true dream of promoting Latin American artists in Europe with partial financial support from the Sterlings. Suddenly, a small commotion caught the couple's attention. Paige was running toward them, dragging by the hand a young woman Madison recognized as the daughter of one of the local producers who supplied the winery. "Madison, Michael!" exclaimed Paige, her eyes shining with excitement. "You need to come see. Bella had puppies. They're in the stable next to the ponies." The news that the little dog, who now lived happily on the estate, had given birth immediately attracted a small crowd of curious guests, all following Paige toward the stable. "Seems our family keeps growing," Michael commented, helping Madison to her feet. "In several ways," she replied with a mysterious smile, instinctively, placing her hand on her still flat belly. She hadn't told anyone the news yet, not even Michael. She was waiting for the perfect moment. Michael caught the gesture, and his gaze instantly moved from Madison's hand to her eyes, which silently confirmed what he was beginning to suspect. We, he stammered, words failing before the emotion. Madison nodded, tears of happiness appearing in her eyes. "I found out yesterday. I wanted to be sure before telling." In a sudden movement, Michael lifted her in his arms and spun, laughing and crying at the same time, exactly as he had done the day she accepted his marriage proposal. "Careful," Madison laughed. "Your mother will notice if we continue. Like this." "Let her notice," Michael declared, gently placing her back on the ground but keeping her in his arms. "Let everyone notice how absurdly happy and grateful I am for the life we've built together." As they walked hand in hand to join the others at the stable, Madison reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there. From a chance encounter at the hospital to building a shared life, a life that would now include a new member, uniting the Harper and Sterling families even more deeply. All because on an apparently ordinary day, she had decided to extend her hand to a frightened patient, a simple act of kindness that had changed the course of multiple lives. Sometimes, Madison thought, the greatest loves begin in the most unexpected circumstances.